Singing Dutchman Productions. Hello and welcome to Doug's Front Porch, a podcast where I get to sit down with friends old and new and have honest conversations. Today I welcome a dear friend from many, many miles away, Christina Heilig, to the front porch. Christina, welcome and thank you so much for coming on the show.
Thank you for inviting me, Doug.
So I said many miles away, and maybe you could hear in that quick little voice snippet that Christina is not from the United States. Dear friend, tell everybody where you are from.
Well, actually, you might have already noticed by my accent that I'm from Germany, southern part of Germany, actually, very small town in, it's called Buchen, but you probably won't know it. It's in the Odenwald, close to Heidelberg.
Close to Heidelberg. A lot of Americans know Heidelberg, so maybe that can get you geographically, everybody out there listening, where Christina is located. I start every episode kind of the same way. Christina, if you could tell the audience a little bit about where you grew up. Did you have any brothers and sisters? You know, what was your childhood like before we move into the next part of the conversation?
Yeah, that's a nice question to ask, actually, because I grew up in an even smaller town or village. It's actually called a town, but it's a village. So, Doug, you know it, Gundelsheim. So I was born there and lived there for the first 18 years of my life with my mom, dad, brother. He's 2 years younger than me. And grandparents were there as well, and some aunts and uncles. So yeah, very nice family setting. And after school, I went to university. I first studied in Mannheim and then in Tübingen. And this is where I got more into English as well.
Yeah, let's talk really quickly about that because, well, let me start this by saying this episode is dropping in the beginning of September, which for Americans, that's back to school. And Christina, just like I, is a teacher at a high school in Germany. And I thought it'd be really cool to have Christina on to talk about kind of differences and similarities between our school systems, because some things are similar, but there's a lot of differences. And I think many Americans would find this conversation interesting. So one thing that I always think a lot of Americans ask me about is why is their English so good? Like, how do they speak English so well? So can you talk really quickly about, like, how is English addressed in the German school system?
Well, at a quite early age, actually. When I went to kindergarten, it wasn't normal that you were taught English there, but these days it's absolutely normal. So right from the start, more or less, like with 1 or 2 years, whenever they are sent to kindergarten, they sing songs, they do these total physical response things, and so they get in touch with the language. And then when you come to primary school, you actually have the first 2 years, you don't do much, but then in year 4 and year 3 and year 4, you have English lessons. And then the next school you go to, you have even more English. So this is probably why.
So when you went on to college, you studied English and then you also picked up Spanish. What was it about languages that interested you so much?
Well, I like to travel, and the more languages you know, the easier it is to travel and to communicate. And I think it's also very, very fascinating to not only learn the language, but about the culture. And with language, you start understanding people and cultures better, because there are different concepts that are transported via language. And if you don't know the language, you don't understand the concepts, and then you can't understand the culture, and so on and so on. And yeah.
So you studied in England, which a lot of Germans will grow up learning British English, but they also are exposed to American English, of course, as well. But when you started, so you had that background in British English, when you came into contact with more Americans, what was that difference like for you to transition from British English to American English? Or was it an issue at all?
Only with few words, because generally, I mean, in Germany, we have so many English movies and music, American English. And so you are actually more exposed to American English than to British English in your private life. And of course, at university, they offered American English courses and British English courses. And I mean, the British, they all don't speak the received pronunciation. So first time I was in Britain, I hardly understood anything. So
Yeah, well, Americans have a hard time too sometimes with that. All right, let's do a quick deep dive into the typical German school system. If I am a child in Germany growing up, what does that look like for me? When does it start? In America, the system is I always say it's very linear. A kid starts in kindergarten and they just go in a straight line until 12th grade. They go from an elementary school to a middle school to a high school and they graduate, period, move on. But the German system doesn't look anything like that. Could you kind of talk about that a little bit, Christina?
mm-hmm. Well, the thing is that as you in the US, you have federal states, and we have federal states as well. And the problem, let's say, is that each federal state can decide on how he wants the school system to look like. And so I can mostly talk about Baden-Württemberg, which would be our country where we come from, land, so to say, the Ländle, as they say these days. And there we start with kindergarten. Then we have elementary school. Kindergarten is normally depends. These days, parents send their children earlier to kindergarten, like nursery kind of thing first. So you can bring them there, I think, at the age of 1 or so. And then till the age of 6 or 7, they are in kindergarten. From 7 to 10, 11. So that's 4 years in primary school and elementary school. And then that's where the big divide starts. And this is a little bit breaking up right now, because this system that we have had in Baden-Württemberg was you had to decide either between Hauptschule, Realschule, or Gymnasium. Hauptschule is year 5 to 9, and you choose this if you at the age of 10, which is really early, or you think or your parents know that you want to go into building or like doing
a trade, some kind of skill or trade.
Yeah. Thank you. Sometimes it's difficult to explain. So if you're good at working with your hands, doing stuff, building walls or painting or whatever, and if you're more the practical type, let's say it like that. And if you go to Realschule, that would be year 5 to 10. And then this is like kind of office work, maybe you would like to do, or what else? Yeah, like secretary or something like that. And then the last choice is Gymnasium. This is from year 5 to either 12 or 13. And this is when you really know that you want to go to university, study, and yeah.
I think one of the toughest things for Americans to understand is that, I mean, you explained that there's the road branches into 3 different paths at 10 years old. And you said, well, it's between a decision made between the student, the parents, but also teacher input, I'm sure, how they performed in elementary school. From an American perspective, I think that's totally crazy that you got this 10-year-old kid. I mean, I think about 10-year-old Doug. I didn't know what path, somebody could have put me on a path that maybe I didn't necessarily want. How do the Germans approach that? I mean, that has to be a kind of a weird, from my perspective, it's a weird, tough decision. From your perspective, what do you have to say about that?
It definitely is. And there are really problems. There used to be, I don't know whether it was really a law, but there used to be the rule that what the teacher said, mostly depending on the grades, where the kid should go. That was done. But these days, the parents are to decide. And even if the teacher says your kid should go to this or that school, if the parents don't want to, they don't have to send him or her there. And so we, for example, receive students that are just not fit for this academic level. And so they struggle. They have a really hard time, and it's yeah, it's a kind of fight. We have to fight every day. We with them, they with us, with the parents, and it's really, really difficult. But the good thing is you can move from every type of school to the next. So if you finish in year 9 and you want to go on, because maybe with 15 you finally figured out that you can do more if you want to, then you can go on, do year 10. If you are fine after year 10, fine, you can stop there. And if not, you can even go on and then do your year 13, have your Abitur, go to university, study. It's all open.
Yeah, we'll come back to the Abitur because I want you to explain that to everybody too. But for Americans listening to this, you think, what do you mean when you're done at 9th grade, you're done? Like to us as Americans, that's crazy. But what the German system does differently, or I think in my opinion, a little better than the American system, is that those kids that are going to the, I don't want to use lower level schools, but the not as, let's call them the not as academic schools, the schools that aren't sending kids directly to university. Those kids, when they're hit 9th grade and they're done, or 10th grade and 9th, or 10th grade and they're done, then they move into like apprenticeship programs, correct? Where whatever skill or trade they want to learn, it's not like their education stops. They are now, but now it's more hands-on, applicable, actually out in the field learning, firsthand, which I think the German system does really well. It's not like the system just cuts these kids loose. It's a natural progression for them to move then into a situation where if I wanted to be a carpenter or a mechanic, then those professions are absorbing me into their world and training me so that when I'm done with that program, I'm productive and I'm able to produce and be a part of society, correct?
Yeah, exactly. And so that's what we call Berufsschule. And it depends. So sometimes they have like 3 days of work wherever they do their apprenticeship and 2 days of school, or sometimes they have like 3 weeks at work and 1 week at school. So that depends. But they have to go to school till they are 18. Doesn't matter what school they go to, but there is this law, that's an actual law, that they have to go to school till they are 18.
And again, from my perspective, the kids that want to be mechanics and carpenters and plumbers, I mean, let's all be realistic. Those kids necessarily aren't the biggest fans of traditional school. And that's where I think the American system fails, is that we force those kids into that. You have to sit, you have to take algebra, you have to read Shakespeare, you have to do, and those kids, that isn't for them. And if they're going to be a mechanic or a carpenter and build homes and fix things, then I don't necessarily need my carpenter to be able to quote Shakespeare. I'd rather have them actually physically, learning their skill or trade. And I think that's where the German system does it a little bit better than our system. And I might take flack from that from my fellow Americans. I don't know. But like you said, those kids that are learning those trades, 3 days out of the week, they are actually, working, doing, physically learning. And then 2 days a week, maybe they're getting the theory in a classroom. But again, it's all applicable to whatever skill or trade that they're learning.
Yeah,
right?
and I mean, they still have lessons in German, for example, or they have to have some classes that are just necessary and obligatory. So for the general learning, but that's very basic, and that's absolutely fine. And if they want, I don't know, with the age of 25 or 30 to learn more and maybe to study Shakespeare, then they still can do this. And even when you finish, when you have a proper job, when you learned your trade and you have your certificate and everything, you can not go to university, but to Fachhochschule. I don't know.
I would like a community college, what we'd call that in America, community college.
Probably, yeah. And then there you can study. So if you are, for example, a mechanic and you're getting bored whatsoever and you want to study mechanics, then you can do that and go to this special kind of university without having your Abitur.
Okay, so let's transition to that. Great segue. So you teach at a gymnasium, which is one of the schools that is the path for kids that are going on to university. And here's another big difference between America and Germany. At the end of that journey, for those kids in the gymnasium, they have to take and pass what in German is called the Abitur. We have nothing really like this in the United States. Give us the elevator pitch on what is the Abitur in Germany.
Well, the last 2 years of your school time, they count actually. So they are divided into half terms. And so we have 4 half terms, and every grade you receive there counts into the big pool of these final exams. And more or less at the end of the 4th semester, you have extra exams. So, and these are in your main subjects. So at the beginning of these 2 years, you can choose what you would like to do, like on a more intense level. For example, you can choose if you want to have German for 5 lessons a week or only for 3 lessons a week. And the same goes with mathematics, English. Some subjects you can just drop. If you don't want to take physics anymore, you don't have to take physics anymore. But you have to take another natural science. So there has to be a subject from each part. So natural science and how do you call the other subjects, like German,
social studies.
Social studies, exactly, and foreign languages. Although you can use Latin as a foreign language, so it doesn't have to be a modern foreign language. It can be Latin, English, French, Spanish, or whatever language the school offers.
So I am now ready to take these tests. So walk us through that. I have chosen the four subjects I have to test in, correct? So let's say I chose German. I have to do German, correct?
Yeah, I would either as an oral exam or as a written exam.
So I have to do German. I have to do a math, or don't I have to? Okay, I have to do a math. I have to do a social studies, or if I chose to do a social studies, and my 4th one might be if I learned a language like English or French or Spanish. Okay, so I know my 4 subjects that I'm being tested on. What does the test look like?
Okay, so they look different according to the subject. So in English, for example, or in Spanish, I can tell you because I'm doing this all the time. You get, first of all, a listening comprehension. So that's probably same like you have. You have to tick things right or wrong, or complete sentences, or match things. After the listening comprehension, there is a reading comprehension. So same, but just read and not listened to. And then you have analysis part. Normally you get the text where the reading comprehension is about. So you have to analyze this text. So there's a question, whatever. And then you have to compare it with one of the topics you dealt with in the last 2 years. So normally you have to read a book and you have to watch a film, and they ask you questions about this book, this film, and how you can compare it with a text. And the last part is writing task. So you have to write a text, and this can be almost everything. This can be rather creative writing, so interior monologue, for example, or a letter to an editor, or it can be also a speech, or it can be an argumentative essay as well. So that would be the test. If it's not written, the exam, then you have an oral exam.
Okay, so what does that look like? It's me. I'm the student. I walk into a room for the oral exam, and who is across the table from me?
Well, first of all, you have, I think, around 20 minutes time to prepare. In these 20 minutes, you get paper. Do you have DIN A4 as well? The format? No, well, doesn't matter. So you have one piece of paper. There is the task. A small text, maybe a poem, maybe a cartoon, whatsoever, and 2 or 3 questions. You prepare. You can take notes about whatever you know about the subject, and then you sit there in a room with normally 3 people. So it's the teacher that you know, who taught you all the stuff. Then there is a person who writes down the questions and what is said and so on. And then there is one more person who is the kind of responsible person, who supervises that everything works fine and that there are no mistakes made and so on.
And I know that you've told me this before, but like those other people that are in the room are most likely high school teachers from other schools in the state so that it's not just your own teachers grading you. It's kind of like a third party. You don't know that person, they don't know you. And I think it makes a little bit more for a fair assessment,
Exactly.
maybe.
It's supposed to be objective or more objective. And the same happens to the written exam. So there are three people who correct them. So me as a teacher who taught them, then it goes to another school and they don't know the names. The students are just numbers. They grade it and then it goes to a third school and there they finally decide. They compare what did the first corrector give as a grade, what did the second do, can we middle, or are there two, is it too wide apart, the grades, and then they have to correct it again and make a grade.
So what I need to stress for the audience is that you're doing this 4 times as a student, and these are extensive tests. I mean, it's hours worth of testing when it's all said and
it's more or less 2 weeks, of course, not for every student. Some finish after the first week, but all the subjects, that's more or less 2 weeks, yeah. And English is, I think, 360 minutes. Is that no, that's too long probably. Well, it's from roughly 8:30 till 2 o'clock, maybe. So.
And you have to pass these exams in order to graduate from the school.
Kind
Correct?
of.
Kind of.
So you can fail depending on how many, let's say, credits you collected during the 2 years.
Okay. But a lot is riding on these tests. I mean, there's a lot of pressure to do well. Yeah. So again, the American system, we don't really have. I mean, we have big tests. We have like the SAT, but that's not a requirement. You don't have to take that. But these, what I always am impressed by, and Germany's not the only country in Europe that has this type of a system. But I think it's the pressure's on the student to really prepare and work hard, and I think it also gives the education system a little bit more value to the actual student in buy-in, I think. And I think that, again, is something that the Germans maybe do a little bit better than we do. Because here's the thing, to the people that don't know this, the reason I know Christina is because her school, which she works at, and the school that I work at, we have a partnership, an exchange program, and it's been in place for, well, before Christina and I were even in the positions. It's old. So we have both been in each other's schools multiple times. So let me ask you this question real quick, Christina. Since you've been in the American school setting, in a typical American high school, what's your knee-jerk reaction to the American system compared to the system that you grew up in and that you work in?
Well, I think what I find quite interesting and what most of the students think is really interesting as well is your timetables, because they are so different from ours. We have each day a different schedule. So, for example, Monday, it's first 2 lessons English, the next 2 lessons mathematics, and then 1 lesson history and 1 chemistry. And then on Tuesday, you have physical education, religious education, and music. And then on Wednesday, you have whatsoever. And in the US, every day looks the same.
Yeah, and the German system, a lot of times, like a student could be done, their day could be over like on Tuesday at 1 o'clock.
Yeah.
And then on Wednesday they might be in school till 2. So it's not like in the Americans is like 8 to 3, or I there's a little bit more of a like a college campus feel, I think, too, that I've noticed from the German perspective. But besides that, what's something that you think is really good about the American system that you've seen?
What I really, really like and what I would love to have is my own room. Because in Germany, teachers move from room to room and the students have their classroom. And when I come into your room, and everything is set, you have your table and you have everything where you need it to be. And it's just nice and cozy, and it's your room and your personality that it breathes and everything. And for us, every time it's a new room, you have to walk in between breaks. We have 5-minute breaks, and depending on where you have to go, you are like out of breath and whatsoever. And then the computer doesn't work because the person just before you switched some cables or whatever, then you have no sound, then it's a mess.
Okay,
Yeah.
I'll ask you, what's a negative that you find about the American system? The timetables or the schedule, is that maybe a negative, or I don't know. What?
Mm, I think that's just something to get used to. What I think is that they are allowed so freely to use, digital devices like their mobile phones, their whatsoever, and that they can do just whatever they want with them. And yeah, because I think attention is made really difficult. But this is actually happening right now at our schools as well. So more and more students use tablets or laptops or whatever, and you can't control it anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. So, two more questions about the German system that's different from ours. One, you said sometimes students have religious class. Explain that to me. What's that like? Because, of course, here in the United States, we have, well, it's not against the law to have a religious class. Well, it kind of is. We can teach about religion, like history of religion or compare religions, but that's where it has to stop in the American system because of the way our society's governed. But Germany, explain that to the people that aren't familiar with the German system.
Well, depending on where you live, the great majority is either Catholic or Protestant. And these two um,
Faiths.
faiths, yeah,
Yeah.
thank you, they are represented at school. And if you are neither of them, there is a class that's called ethics. And so you have to decide whether you want to go to the religious education classes in Roman Catholic, in Protestant, or in ethics. And in ethics,
What does that look like? Okay, I'm a little Lutheran boy. I'm in my Protestant class in school. Is it like is it actual church instruction, or what does that look like? What are you learning about?
um, it's different. So it depends on the year, of course. The younger you are, the more you do like these biblical stories, like what happened around Easter. And at the beginning, you draw a lot and sing songs and so on. But then, of course, you learn how the Catholic, since I'm Catholic, I know about this more than about what they do in the Protestant classes. But you learn about how the Catholic Church is structured, you learn something about the history, you learn something about, you do some Bible studies as well. And of course, you try to answer some philosophical questions as well. And the older you get, the more philosophical it gets, the more ethical it gets. And you include different aspects. So, for example, of course, since it's a very important German subject as well, what happened during the Third Reich and so on, and how did the church behave there, and how would you have behaved? What do you think? And then moral dilemmas and so on.
Perfect transition, because this was the next question I was going to ask you. Because a lot of Americans ask me this because they know I have experience in Germany. How does the German school system address World War II, Hitler, and the Holocaust? How are German kids taught that?
Well, they deal with it almost every year they are at school. So there are different ways of approaching it. In German, for example, you read novels where the subject is treated. So in year 5, that can already start, and there are children's books that deal with this subject. So you read this, talk about it in class, and so on. Then, of course, in your religious education classes, you deal with the subject. And then in your social studies classes, like in history, of course, you deal with it, the facts that from 1936 to 1945, blah, 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 what happened, and so on. You do this. And then in your politics classes, you talk about it as well. And then we have like sometimes every now and then a Jewish person comes in to school, talks about, I mean, these days it's getting more and more difficult because there are not so many survivors of the Holocaust, but just this year we had a relative of, I think, Himmler, it was, like the niece or whatsoever. And she started to investigate, and her role in the family and what it did to the whole family and so on. And she gave a talk and students could ask questions and things like that.
This is I wasn't going to talk about this, but I'm going to say this real quick to the audience. If you find this conversation interesting, there is a documentary out there called Hitler's Children. It's made by a Jewish filmmaker. Well, I guess he's half Jewish, half American. It's in English, but he has tracked down descendants of the higher ranking Nazis, and how they had to deal with knowing who their grandfather was or what their great uncle did. I mean, these atrocities to humanity. It's a fascinating documentary. I think the last time I saw it was on Netflix, but search Hitler's Children, because Hitler didn't have any children himself, but that was the name of the film, Hitler's Children. Fascinating. So I'm going to transition a little bit, Christina. I'm going to ask you. So you were, you and I are almost exactly the same age. You grew up in the 80s and into the 90s, and as a child of, or a grandchild of the World War II generation. As a German, this has nothing to do with school. I was asking you, as a grandchild of that generation that lived the war, that fought the war, and as a German, what was that like for you as a kid growing up and then learning that your country had done these things in the 1930s and 40s?
Actually, I think as a kid, I didn't really process this. My grandparents, they didn't talk about it. And if they did, I think it was only my grandma, and she just, once in a while dropped something like, oh, I really like to play the accordion back then with the WDM, Bund Deutscher Mädels, yeah, WDM. And yeah, so that was it. And then, of course, when I went to school and we started reading those novels and so on, I still didn't really link it. It was a sad story, and it happened somewhere to somebody a very long time ago. And of course, the older you get, the more you get it, actually. And then, of course, you start to ask yourself questions like, both my grandpas went to war, and what did they do there, and why did they do it? And but by then they were both dead, so I didn't have the possibility to ask them. Yeah, and then you start asking yourself, what would you have done? And I think if you're really honest to yourself, probably you don't like the answer, because you don't know. And I think you can't judge. That is the most important thing. So that you shouldn't be judgmental, because back then, yeah, everything was different.
Do you think, in your opinion, that in Germany today, now that it's, going on 80 years later, that there still is a collective sense of guilt among the Germans for World War II? Or has time started to change that?
I think it really depends on the part of society you are talking about.
What do you mean by that?
There are people who just don't give anything about it. They don't care about it. It's no topic for them. They are not interested. And there are others that really think something like this should never ever happen again. And they try to keep the memory awake so that things like that won't repeat themselves. So, yeah.
I think it's a fascinating topic, and I think for most Americans, we have terrible atrocities in our history as well. We look at how we treated the Native American population in the late 1800s, slavery, of course, in the United States. I mean, we can't gloss over that. But for most Americans, that stuff happened well over 100 years ago, and that collective sense of guilt necessarily isn't there in our society. But I think, looking at it from World War II, I mean, we both lived in an era where the people that lived that and experienced it were still alive. In fact, we ate meals with them. We hugged those people. We loved those people, and it's still a very realistic part of our story. And that's what, for me as an American, always thinking about it from the German perspective, or trying to wrap my head around the German perspective, how is that collective sense of guilt there, and how would you deal with it, knowing that, man, maybe not your grandfather did terrible things, but your grandfather's friends might have done terrible things, or your grandmother idly sat quietly by and not protest because it could have cost her life, and the atrocities that the Nazi regime brought upon the Germans. It's something I always am curious to hear what other Germans think about when it comes to this topic. And I think as time goes on and we have young, more new generations come into the fold, of course, the World War II generation will continue to go farther back in history, and that will have an effect as well on how society views that era in history, just like it has in America, and how Americans view their past history too. So I just think it's fascinating.
Mm.
Okay, what else did I want to ask you about? I had so many things I wanted to talk about. I was really curious about that. Okay. Well, we're running long on time too, Christina. Holy time. Whenever I talk to you, it's always like time just flies by. All right. We're going to compare and contrast Germany and the United States real quick. So not the school system, our two countries. You've been to the United States a bunch of times. I've been to Germany a bunch of times. What are some things that you really find weird about the United States?
Well, how you deal with distances, let's say it like that. So first time I was in the exchange, some of the students, they told me, well, we went to have a coffee at the Niagara Falls. And I was like, what? So you stayed there overnight? No, we drove there, had the coffee and drove back. And in Germany, you wouldn't do that. So this is really, kind of fascinating for me.
What's something that you really like about the United States?
I like the landscape. Really, I think it's beautiful, especially where you live. These rolling hills and the river and everything so green and wide and open. And the people I know there, I really do like.
Well, you've done a lot of you've done a lot of traveling in the United States too, outside of just central Pennsylvania. How do you describe, if a German comes up to you and says, "Oh, I heard you went to America"? How do you describe, generally speaking, the American people? Do you find us to be welcoming and warm?
Yes, but I think on a superficial level, kind of. So if you go into a shop and they like, "Hey, love, how are you?" and I like your haircut, and I like, what? So
Because explain to the people that are listening, if I walk into a German store in Germany, would those things happen?
not at all. Maybe you rather get the feeling that you are an intruder and you shouldn't be there. So, oh, a customer. Oh no, now I have to stop manicuring my fingers or whatsoever.
Yeah. Okay. That I think is a knee-jerk reaction for Americans when they travel to Germany too at first, because the Germans aren't necessarily as open as the average American is. And like you said, kind of we Americans are very quick to say, pass somebody on the street, say, "Hey, how you doing?" But we really don't care how they're doing. It's like habit in our culture to just say those types of things. Where I've found in all of my travels throughout Germany is that won't happen. But if a German does ask, that means they're truly interested, and it's not
they want
just
to know the answer. Exactly.
Yeah, it's not just a flippant phrase or question that you ask. Yeah. Okay, take a look at the lens of your own country now. What is something that you are not happy with or that you don't like about Germany as a German?
That we are so bureaucratic.
So explain that real quickly to the audience, because they might not understand that.
Well, you need more or less a certificate, a stamp, or whatsoever for everything. So you can't just go somewhere without having it on paper with an official seal on it or whatsoever. So nothing works without having gone at least through, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 offices. And yeah.
Yeah, I learned that the hard way when I lived there. It's like I thought for sure, oh, I got what I needed, and then somebody be like, you need 2 more stamps here on this paper before you can. It's like, what? Okay, what's something that you really like about your country and the Germans as a whole?
Well, since I grew up there, probably the feeling of being at home. So you know everything, you know how it works, and due to the pandemics, I started traveling more in Germany and not around the world. And there are really, really nice places in Germany as well.
There certainly are. There certainly are. Well, Christina, we end every interview the same way. You're going to get 10 quick questions from me that have nothing to do with anything we talked about, but just to give the listeners an opportunity maybe to get to know you a little better. Are you ready for your questions, Christina?
I try my
All
best.
right, here we go. Number 1. What is your morning drink of choice?
Coffee.
Yeah, explain to the people how much of a culture coffee is in Germany.
Well, especially for teachers, it's like their life elixir. So we drink it always, all the time. And talking about my husband, for example, even drinks it at 12 as a midnight.
Yeah. I'm a coffee drinker, and what I love about going to Germany is the fact that coffee is always like expected. So you have it at breakfast, and you talk real quickly about the idea of Kaffee and Kuchen in this afternoon time period. What's that part of German culture like?
Yeah, it's when you meet someone in the afternoon, normally it's always with coffee and cake. So this is the social get together. It's a little bit maybe like the British tea time, but with coffee and cake. And depending on how good a cook or a baker you are, then you have not only normal cakes, but Schwarzwälder Kirschtorte, so Black Forest cake, and so on, several layers with cream. And yeah, if you want to impress the people you invite, yeah.
So listen, Americans, if you like coffee, Germany is a very good place to travel. You might not think that at first. Everybody always just relates beer and wine to Germany, but coffee, huge coffee culture there in Germany. All right, question number 2. This is going to be interesting because I know you so well. Who is a go-to musical artist or group for you?
Well, it used to be Typo Negative, but the singer is unfortunately dead. But apart from that, I like to go to almost every kind of concerts. I like to listen to almost every kind of music, but I'm into heavy metal, rock and roll, gothic music. So, and there is if you are interested in your listeners in gothic music, there is a huge gothic festival in Leipzig, and people from all over the world come every year and have a really great time there. So the Wave Gothic Treffen in Leipzig.
Top notch, huh? Top notch. Mm-hmm. The first time I met Christina, so Christina, guys can't see her, but she's shorter and a petite woman, and I met Christina, and we hit it off right away, and we started talking about music, of course, at some point, and I learned that she's into this heavy metal goth. I was like, who is this? Because she doesn't look the part, or at least not when I saw her, or the part that I had in my mind what a goth music listener should look like, of course, stereotyping. But I always found that so intriguing about you, that you really are into that type of music, because I'm not at all. All right. Question number 3. What movie can you watch over and over again and it never gets old?
That is, of course, one of the old ones, Pretty Woman and Dirty Dancing. These are the ones I really, really like. Yeah, typical girl movies.
Typical American with that answer. Wow. Okay. Yeah. What's the last thing that you read?
Right now, I'm reading a book about female medicine. So how medicine should change and focus on the gender difference. And that's very interesting as well, because female bodies and male bodies just don't work the same, and they need different medication and whatever. And
so you're an English teacher at a high school in Germany. Mm-hmm. So you read a lot. You've had to over the course of your studies. Do you gravitate more towards fiction or nonfiction?
No, fiction, definitely fiction. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Number 5. What is your favorite pizza topping?
Cheese.
Sounds good. Number 6. Laying on the beach or going for a hike?
Hike.
Okay. And again, Germany, great hiking country. Oh, great hiking country. Mm-hmm. Number 7. You've invited me over for dinner, and we've eaten many dinners together, Christina. What are you making?
Depends on what my guests request. No,
I no requests. I just want to walk in and sit down. So surprise me. What are you making?
I really like to do Thai food or Asian food. So probably a curry, or some wraps, spring rolls, whatever.
Such a classic German answer there. Okay, I have to ask you. Thinking typical German foods. What's your favorite German meal?
My mom does it, so for me, she prepares it perfectly well. Rouladen.
Okay, so explain to people what rouladen is.
So it's a very thin, long piece of meat, and you fill it with sausage, with onions, mustard, cucumbers if you want to. So there are different types, and then you roll it, and then you fry it, and then you let it simmer for, I don't know, hours, till the meat is really, really, it almost
melts
falls.
In your mouth.
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
It's delicious. I haven't had Christina's mother's rouladen, but I have had some of her baked goods, and I'm telling you what, people, if you get the invitation, you need to go because it's delicious.
Next time you come, maybe we can
make
have rouladen.
Yeah, that sounds good. All right, this next question. So you have been all over the world. Do you know off the top of your head how many countries have you been to?
I haven't counted, actually.
Okay, but it's a lot. It's a lot.
Yeah.
So here's a question for you. Where is a dream vacation destination? So you've been a lot of places. Where's some place that you still really, like, number one on your list of places you haven't been yet?
I would like to go to New Zealand. And I really would like to go to the Scandinavian countries. So, I mean, I've been to Helsinki, I've been to Bergen, and I've been to southern part of Sweden, but I haven't seen a lot of it. So that would be really nice. And yeah.
Out of all the places you've been in your travels, what are your top 2 places that you've been? As far as, like, you just love them.
Yeah. Australia. So that was really beautiful. Different parts of Australia, but Tasmania especially, very special. And England.
England. Okay.
But that's probably because I'm so emotional about it. I had a really good time there, and so yeah.
Sounds good. Number 9, what is something that you're afraid of?
Apart from spiders and snakes and so on.
Well, you can use that as your answer too. It doesn't matter.
No. I always have, like, kind of these worst case scenarios in my mind. So can be anything. So sometimes quite a lot.
Do you find yourself to overthink things and worry too much?
Yeah, sometimes. It's getting better over the years because every time I worry and then I find out, well, there was no need to worry. Then I tell myself next time, just, relax and see how it goes. And then normally it goes well.
Yeah, how about that? I find myself doing that too sometimes. Like you said, at the end of the day, everything that you thought was going to happen didn't even come close to happening. So, all right, last question.
Exactly.
What job, other than one that you've had in the past, would you love to have?
Sorry, I didn't get the first part because.
Okay, I'll say it again. I cut in and out a little bit.
You were gone.
What job, other than one that you've currently had or that you've had in the past, would you love to have? So, like, a dream job.
Actually, I don't have any other job I would like to do. It's I thought about it really a lot of times because I'm not 100% happy with the system and how everything works, but I just can't think of an alternative.
I think you would make a really good travel writer.
Really?
Like writing for travel magazines or something like that. I think you'd be good at that.
Maybe a librarian. Maybe I would like to be a librarian as well. I could sit there, read the whole day, and order all the books I like to have.
There you go. Well, Christina, it has been an absolute joy. I count you as a sister that I never had, and it was such a pleasure to, the last couple of years have been really tough on our relationship because we were supposed to be together a couple times, and COVID said, no, I don't think so. I'm so glad that you were able to come up here on the show and do the podcast with me. And hopefully some people are really interested now in the German school system, or at least get a better idea and thinking about some of the things that we talked about, good or bad. And I just want to thank you again so much. I value your friendship, our friendship, a lot. And I hope that you have a great rest of the fall as we move into it. And thanks again for coming up on the show.
Thank you for inviting me. It was a pleasure.
And how would we say goodbye in German to the audience?
Tschüss, macht's gut.
Tschüss, macht's gut. Thanks, Christina. Thank you for listening to Doug's Front Porch, a conversational podcast with your host, Doug Maidenford. If you enjoyed this episode, I'd love for you to subscribe, rate, and give a review on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts from. 5 stars only, please. Follow along on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Just look for Doug's Front Porch. Also, please feel free to tell all of your friends about the show, and I'll see you all next time on my front porch.